Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Erin Cheever and I'm a reference and outreach librarian at NOAA Central Library. I'm honored to introduce two outstanding risk communicators who are presenting this afternoon. Dr. Jeannette Sutton is an expert in alerts and warnings for short messaging platforms. She has conducted research across a range of natural, technological, and human-induced hazards and serves on advisory boards for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the United States Geological Survey, and the Department of Homeland Security. She is funded by the National Science Foundation and is an associate professor of communication and director of the Risk and Disaster Communication Center at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Erica Kuligowski is a research social scientist in the engineering laboratory at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, with 16 years of experience studying human behavior in disasters. She has received Department of Commerce gold and bronze medals for her social science contributions to the federal investigations of the 2001 World Trade Center disaster, the 2003 Rhode Island Nightclub Fire, and the 2011 Joplin, Missouri tornado. Dr. Kuligowski has expertise in decision-making and response behavior under imminent threat, emergency communications, and evacuation modeling. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Sutton.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here today. I'm going to be speaking for the first half of the presentation, and then we'll be turning it over to Erica.
Do they think it's in person?
And if you can send me a chat message if the video or if the screen is not showing, Erin, I think it should be, since we switched the presenters. So today we're talking about creating alerts and warnings for short messaging channels. This comes directly from the work that Erica and I conducted this last year, where we conducted a review of the literature and leading to a set of messages and messaging templates. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we did what we've done and before we get started there. So why are we actually conducting this research, or why have we? First of all, we know that risk communicators must deliver timely and actionable messages under imminent threat, but we also have seen over the last 10 years or so that these channels have changed. From the messages that used to be sent out in long form, such as your EAS messages, we now see that they're shorter, going out over network communication channels such as social media or over wireless emergency alerts. And so it creates these new challenges for us about how do we design messages, and two kinds of messages in particular, because they're related to the different channels that are used. One is, how do we design messages to increase behavioral intent or to get people to take action, which is one of the primary concerns. And the second one is, how do we increase message sharing across these social networks in order to make messages more visible? And so in this talk, we're going to share with you the evidence that's based on the evidence-based guidance that we've identified on communication strategies for short messaging channels. And then we're going to talk about how that evidence-based guidance differs based upon the three different messages that have 3 character lengths. There's a 90 character length message, which would correspond with your traditional wireless emergency alert. A 280 character length message, which would correspond with the newer style of Twitter, because tweets have changed to include 280 characters. And then a 360 character message, which represents the direction that wireless emergency alerts are going to be shifting to, because they're going to expand the message content, the length, and also add other features as in the near future. So our research methods, we conducted first a systematic review of the literature, looking across all of the literature specifically on what we know about warnings for short messages. So short messages being those that I just described, delivered over different kinds of channels. And it's a rather limited number of publications, but by doing the systematic review, we were able to identify all of the things that scholars have indicated that increase behavioral intent or increase message passing on social media. And then after that, we developed a draft guidance and took that guidance to a workshop with a group of people that we called super users, which represent emergency management, the National Weather Service, some of your colleagues, and others who have demonstrated a use of social media and of wireless emergency alerts and other short messaging devices to get messages out to their populations. And they provided feedback to us as expert reviewers. From that, we revised the guidance, and then send it back out for additional review. And we also included a set of messages, which we'll be sharing with you today, to get review from experts within particular, who have expertise in specific areas or context areas. So we'll be showing you a tsunami message today that went out to tsunami experts. And that was incorporated into the final report. And then most recently, we published this report in the Natural Hazards Review, which is now available to you, and it's called Alerts and Warnings on Short Messaging Channels, Guidance from an Expert Panel Process. And if you have any questions at all related to the methods, or you want to get your hands on what the templates actually look like, that is where you're going to want to go to, is getting that particular document. And I believe that the library, the NOAA library, now has that in hand. So really quickly, just thinking about what is the current status of short messaging platforms for those who may not be as familiar. The two that we're talking about today are wireless emergency alerts, which are sent to individual mobile devices by authorized government alerting authorities through the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. This is an opt-out system, and messages are broadcast from local area cell towers to the mobile devices that are within that area. They are currently 90 characters in length, and they're going to increase to 360 characters in length, and they're also going to add some additional features, such as including a URL, including imagery, and they should also be moving to changes in not just English language text messaging. And then the other short message platform that we're looking at today is Twitter, where users post tweets or messages. They're delivered to people through the online application. So each Twitter accounts have followers, and the objective of tweets is to get your message to go farther in that follower network. It's an opt-in system, so people have to actually be paying attention to the information in order to receive it or to see it and actually do something with that information. Messages are currently 280 characters in length, and they can be directed to individual users, which is symbolized by the @ symbol. They can include what's called a hashtag, which is the little number symbol, and that helps to put information into a particular channel so that people can find the topic of conversation by searching on hashtags. And tweets also can include a shortened web length in order to reduce the number of characters that a usual online link would take out of that 280 character message. So a little bit of theory to talk about how do we understand public responses to alerts and warnings, because this is where all of our research is grounded in, is understanding not just what are the characteristics of messages that are important, but why are those characteristics important? And so we draw from two different scholars, or two sets of scholars. First, here is the work by Lindell and Perry, which is the protective action decision model, and they start by looking at the individual and consider that each individual who receives a message also has experience and knowledge and roles and responsibilities. They also have these physical abilities and socioeconomic status. These are all things that affect their interpretation and the reception of the message that they might receive. And then external to them that affects the messages coming in are these environmental cues, such as what's happening around them, the social context, who they're surrounded by, their interactions with others, information sources, channels, and message content, which interacting with the individual should lead to some sort of a behavioral response. And in this particular research project, we're most interested in these information sources, information channels, and the message content, and how that affects the decision-making process that leads to the behavioral response. The decision-making process is best viewed when we look at the model that was created by Maletti and Sorensen in 1990, where they cataloged all of the empirical research records to identify how people interpret and respond to those messages through their decision-making process. And what they identified was that the messages received, and the intent of a message, a warning message, is to shift people from this perception of safety to the perception of risk so that they will have a behavioral response. Now, as people are receiving that message, they have to go through that decision-making process, which includes things like receiving the message and paying attention to it, which we know can sometimes be a little difficult to get people to pay attention. They have to understand the message. They have to believe it in terms of how bad is it going to be and who is the message coming from. They have to believe that they are personally susceptible, so they're within the location of the threat, or that the threat could be coming towards them. They have to make a decision, or at least be able to decide based upon that information that comes to them in the message. And at the same time that they're doing this individual activity, they're engaged in this more social activity, which has been referred to as milling. We also can call it risk information seeking. We might call it the emergence of a norm through this collective communication with other people. But essentially, it's this interaction between the individual and others around them in order to move through that decision-making process so that they can truly understand in relation with others. They believe the information in relation to others. They personalize the information in relation to others, and they decide what they're going to do in relation to others. And it's this milling process that we generally are concerned about reducing the amount of time that people take on that, because it does delay their protective action, which we're hoping will be the behavioral response. And so by crafting messages that are better, especially for these short messaging platforms, the goal is to reduce the amount of time that people spend milling so that they might be able to make that decision to either take action or pass that message on to others. So now, after that very short introduction, I'm going to pass this over to Erica, who's going to talk about the research findings from our research.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I hope so. I'll start here. So for our research findings, they are from two different sets of research. First, looking at WIA and short messages on wireless devices. This research that we used to create our findings and guidance has primarily come from lab and experiment-based research. And this was focused on behavioral intent. So what might people understand, believe, or plan to do if they receive this message under imminent threat? So there are 5 elements of a warning message that are essential to include, such that we can ensure that people go through that decision-making process appropriately and take action that is the best, safest, and most effective. And so we have message source, hazard, threat, and consequences, populations and geographies at risk, the time to take action, and then the recommended protective actions. And so for message source, it's who is sending this message. For hazard, threat, and consequences, it's important to discuss what is happening, its likelihood, its potential consequences, and the severity of impacts. For population, it's important to talk about the populations or geographical areas at risk. For time to take action, it's important to talk about the time that the event shall begin, more importantly, the time that people should be taking action, complete their action, and also the time when the message will expire. And then for protective actions, what are they, how might people take them, and why should they be taken? And so also message style is important here, in that the message should be clear, specific, certain, accurate, and consistent. And we also have quite a number of research and literature on Twitter messages on social media. And so this research is case-based, post-event analysis to model behaviors. And so here, the literature focused on analyzing the actual behaviors of individuals, and that focuses on whether or not retweeting took place or message passing. And so how the content, the number of followers, the timing or context of message sharing influence these behaviors. And so important message passing elements, the source of the message, so who sends that, and their number of followers, the message contents, so does it include the hazard, impact, guidance, location, those 5 elements that are important, as well as information about the hazard and potential thanks regarding what is going on with the hazard itself, the disaster, could be also recovery time periods. So the message style, whether or not it includes some of those aspects that Jeannette was talking about, the @ symbol, hashtag, the URL, etc., and also the timing of the message, be it pre-event, event, or post-event. And so what are some of the aspects of short messages that attract attention? And this goes back to that decision-making process that Jeannette was talking about. And the way that we worked with our literature and organized it in our literature review and our guidance was, what are the factors that influence each stage of this decision-making process? So first, what should the message say to attract attention? So the message should be timely, up-to-date, include relevant information. It should convey hazard, threat, and its impacts. It should include instructions or guidance on protective actions. It should also convey the location of the impact and include official or highly relevant source. And so a credible source that the message receivers would find credible. Also, stylistically, there are aspects of a message that could attract attention, the use of all caps, bolding certain words, using different colors to emphasize a word or a statement, using imperative or directive statements. In Twitter, that also involves including a hashtag, as well as including a visual image. So next, our next stage in the decision-making process involves comprehension. So what is it about the message that can increase comprehension from the receiver's standpoint? And that involves avoiding abbreviations and acronyms. And we'll go into some of that when we look at the actual message templates. Also clearly identifying the threat, what it is, and what is the potential impact. And then providing specific information about populations at risk or the locations of the impact. So that would be avoiding non-specific geographic areas like Denver or Washington, D.C. That's confusing. Is that the entire area of D.C. or is it some aspect of D.C. that is affected by the disaster? Also, the term "this area" assumes that the receivers understand how the dissemination methods of the technology, in this case WIAs, work, and that's not always the case. So the receiver is not always going to understand that if they're within a certain location around a cell tower, they will receive this message. So that can be confusing as well. Also, maps that are clear, readable, and understandable can influence and increase comprehension. Believability, the next stage and where Jeannette was discussing the decision-making stages. If the message is sent from a known and a trusted source, that can certainly influence believability. And sent with a source that is not just trusted and known, but also understandable, right, from the previous stage, comprehension. So messages sent without a source or with a confusing source can certainly decrease public trust. And then sending threat messages sparingly. can also affect believability. So too many of them can be detrimental to the receivers in believing whether this threat is actually real. And then making sure that the message reflects the seriousness of the event and the time of the event. And then lastly, it's important to influence the personalization of the message, the personalization of risk, and the personal sense of urgency, all sort of saying the same thing. So one way to do that is to indicate the seriousness of the event, using words like imminent danger or immediate evacuation or urgent, critical, now. Action words also help indicate the need to take action. So the use of unclear terminology could certainly hinder this, using unambiguous action words or phrases. Some examples we have in the paper are radiological warning. Will receivers truly understand what that means, and that they'll understand what that means to them? And then similarly, in this area can hinder personalization of risk if people don't really understand that they're located in this area. And it would be helpful to say a little bit more about what this area entails. So I'm going to go into some example message templates. Jeannette and I worked, as she mentioned, on these templates and then sent them out for expert review. Here we are providing, and in the paper, we provide more examples. We have just a few here. Examples of 280 and 360 character messages. And the reason we're doing this here is to highlight how you might use additional characters to improve message effectiveness. These are simply examples. I want to make sure that that's clear on how you might create 280 or 360 character messages. And then also, it hopefully will help you on what to think about when you're creating your own templates. These messages may not include the correct words, certainly not for every hazard, but we have a lot of experts on the line who do know what to say. Hopefully, we're providing the foundation for you to create your own message templates. And we recognize also that some of these messages I'm about to show, using particular channels, for example, Twitter, may not be feasible to get these messages to the receiver in time, especially for example, large-scale tsunami events, especially the one that we're including an example on, which is very rapid onset. So it's more important in those instances to have templates ready to use. So overall, here we want to show how you might create example templates based on social science research. So going back to those 5 elements of an effective message, I want to relate those to tornadoes here and talk about some of the example sources. Certainly can be the Weather Service or Emergency Management Agency. As far as the threat, it's important to talk about a tornado warning, but then also describing the threat. For example, tornado reported on the ground, and the consequences potentially being flying debris can damage or destroy homes, injure people, etc. And then related to populations and geographies at risk, it's important not just to say an area, for example, Denver or Washington, D.C., as we note earlier in this presentation, but maybe to describe city or county names, landmarks that people will be more familiar with, even highway mile markers. Also, it's important to say what time action shall be taken. For example, in a tornado, that action is likely to be go now. You may even want to say something like, do not wait until you see trees toppling over or something like that, so that they know that they need to take action immediately, even if environmental cues are not obvious right now. And then certainly the recommended protective actions to protect yourself in a tornado are on the screen. And so here we are showing just a few examples only to compare with the 360 and 280 character messages I'm about to show you. I do want to note these were taken from Weather Warnings on the Go from Weather Service. We did have some super users at our workshop, so these templates were provided before our workshop. I do want to note that based upon focus group research, Individuals receiving these messages may not necessarily know the source abbreviation, so they may not be as familiar with National Weather Service, especially in areas that may not get a lot of tornado. Just over on Friday night, I live in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and we had a tornado warning come across on WIA. That is not very often for us to have those types of things happen. It's also not necessarily obvious where people should take shelter, how they should shelter effectively, and what area is under threat. They also may be confused about any of the time zone acronyms, for example, PDT or EST, and then also maybe confusion regarding check local media. However, there is all caps used, for example, in the tornado emergency message. That certainly falls in line with social science research. And emergency messages, that emergency message notes that the tornado was spotted in this area, which could potentially increase urgency surrounding that message. So what does a tornado warning look like for 360 characters? Here, we're just demonstrating how all 5 elements of an effective message can be placed within 360 characters. So moving from 90 to 360 here provides an opportunity to spell out the source of the message, provide additional details on the tornado and its consequences, and provide additional information on how to shelter effectively. We also use all caps for tornado warning and for now, which could help in the grabbing the receiver's attention, as well as affecting personalization of the message. So just to show you here, here's our source of the message. Highlighting that, highlighting our hazard, tornado warning, strong tornado has been spotted on the ground. High winds and large flying debris can flatten a building in this storm. So that's our hazard and consequences. We also have our population at risk. And so we try to include things like landmarks, the airport, the Wheeler Ferris wheel in Oklahoma City, Bricktown, which is a city is there as well. The time being now. And then actions, taking shelter now, going to the lowest level and staying away from windows, and then waiting for further instruction. However, we realize that these certainly are not messages that are perfect. And so in our paper, we try to identify ways that these may still potentially cause some issues. For example, people still may not be familiar even with these landmarks or the city of Bricktown. Although we are trying to improve familiarity by using landmarks. Individuals may also not know what constitutes the lowest level in a building, how long to shelter, or how to wait for further instructions. However, with that said, I'm hoping that you can see how we are improving our information dissemination here with 360 characters compared with our 90 characters. Demonstrating here how we can include all 5 elements in a 280 character tweet. The source is not included in this message since it's automatically populated by the channel, which is Twitter. And so moving from 90 to 280 here does again provide opportunity for us to include additional details on the hazard, its consequences, and how to shelter effectively. We have a hashtag here, which, as Jeannette noted, helps to identify the, helps to place the message in a channel of information on social media, so on Twitter. We have all caps we're using all caps here to identify the threat and the timing, which may affect perceptions of message urgency and or potentially grab the receiver's attention. So let me go through this. The hazard being tornado warning, strong tornado spotted, and high winds and large debris can destroy buildings in this storm. Population, again, similar to what we had in the previous 360 message. Now, again, was our time, and then action, take shelter on lowest level away from windows, wait there for further instructions. And so just wanted to point out here that similar to our 360 character message, people may not necessarily know what constitutes the lowest level in a building, how long they should shelter for, and how to receive instructions. With that said, a visual image or map of the tornado warning area, for example, may help to personalize the threat. So let me start off by saying this picture may not be 100% accurate, but Jeannette and I want to show here, we're demonstrating that a picture can draw attention to the tweet. We may not know the exact effectiveness of the picture here related to this tweet, but I do want to note that Jeannette is working on some upcoming research out soon that will talk more about the effectiveness of visual graphics for short messaging. A visual image like this certainly may help to personalize the threat for a receiver, especially if they're able to place themselves within the warning area. However, this may not be applicable for all people to do. Some people may be better at maps than others. Now, going into tsunami here, we want to talk about the elements of an effective message for tsunami. Going back to our 5 elements, we have message source could be the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, an emergency management agency. Related to the threat, we might want to say tsunami warning, but then providing a little bit more information about the threat. We have quite a large tsunami. We're providing an example here of 20-foot waves approaching the coast. You also want to describe the consequences, so people who do not evacuate could be injured or die. We're interested again in describing a little bit more about the geographies at risk, and we can show you how we do that. Timing, moving now, or it could be by a certain point in time. And then you also may want to put information about waiting for an all clear message before you return. And then finally, recommended protective action for tsunami is also important to include. So what does a tsunami warning look like in 90 characters? We have a few examples here, one taken from the National Weather Service, and the one at the bottom has been tested from work that Jeannette has done, funded by Department of Homeland Security. And again, these are simply in there for comparison purposes. Based on focus group research, we know that, for example, the message on the bottom, so if individuals receive that, they may be unlikely to know what the source abbreviation CAL OES stands for, which may be true for the message above for NWS. In some cases, there may be confusion about acronyms such as PDT and what that stands for. And if that time may reference the end of the tsunami event, the end of tsunami evacuation, or the end of the warning message. Individuals receiving either of these messages may not know who should evacuate or where they should go, or even what is meant by tsunami danger or tsunami warning. So just one note here, in our paper we talk about an option for the bottom message. One of our expert reviewers suggested a different way of stating that. We have that in the paper. Rather than CAL OES evacuate now tsunami warning, he suggested CAL OES says evacuate low-lying areas now, tsunami warning in effect until further notice. And that does conform with our guidance. However, it wasn't tested. So I just wanted to bring that up. If you get a hold of the paper and are interested in reading more about that, that's in there. So what does a tsunami warning look like for 360 characters? So moving from 90 to 360, we have the opportunity to spell out the source of the message. We can provide more detail about the tsunami event and its consequences, and more detail on how to evacuate. We also use all caps here for the warning, for the protective action to move, and then also for the timing, which may affect perceptions of message urgency as well as grabbing the reader's attention. So let me just go through this. Oh, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that we provided also reading levels on the bottom of our 360 and 280 character messages. And the reason we've done that is because there is literature that suggests that messages, especially for people under imminent threat, should be written at about the grade 6 reading level. It can be very stressful. Our stress levels could potentially narrow our ability to focus, and or actually narrow our ability to make sense and comprehend specific types of information. So we wanted to provide our reading level statistics using our Fleischmann-Kincaid reading level scores. Just wanted to make sure I said that before I forgot. So here's our source spelled out. Here's our hazard information. 20-foot waves are approaching. People who do not evacuate low-lying areas could die. That's very urgent, strong language, and we recognize that. This is quite a large-scale tsunami we're talking about here. Population, the Orange County coast from San Clemente to Seal Beach. Time is now, but we are specifying also a time by which people should be moving away from beaches and other waterways, 6 p.m. And then here are the action, protective action section of the message. I just wanted to make note that people may still lack familiarity with coastal areas. They may even require more specific names of beaches and landmarks. Excuse me. Jeannette and I went over and round about exactly how to state this at least 5 building stories high and 6 blocks from the beach and other waterways. And it's important to let people know where, how far up and how far away from the beaches they need to be so that they can be safe. Because the risk area is so large in this example, it could be difficult to specify the locations where people should be moving to for evacuation or sheltering, such as parks, universities, local landmarks, but you may find that that might be a better way of messaging that information. And then moving on to our 280 character tweet related to tsunami, I would like to just remind the audience that we certainly recognize that this is a large scale event. And so the message provider for this example may not have the opportunity to send a message like this through Twitter. Our purpose here is just to show how you might do it, not necessarily if it's feasible for the event that we're highlighting. But we do want to recognize that it's important to be thinking about the channel by which you might want to be sending these messages and whether or not it's feasible that this would reach someone for this type of event. And so maybe the best that we could hope for in this example is that an earthquake early warning message combines tsunami here. But just focusing on this example, moving from 90 to 280 characters, again, we're spelling out our more about the tsunami threat, the consequences, and how to evacuate. Again, we have a hashtag which places this message within the channel of information. We use all caps to grab the reader's attention and potentially increase perceptions of urgency. And so here's our hazard information. Here's our population information. We did have to reduce that information here as we moved from 360 to 280. Now is our timing, and then that is our action information. Certainly a visual image, again, potentially a map of inundation zones might be able to help personalize the threat. Again, no source is included in our 280 character message because that is automatically populated by this channel. We're not advocating particularly for this graphic here. This is just an example of what a tweet might look like. Certainly potentially grabbing people's attention. And again, the graphic might be a good opportunity to provide visuals of inundation zones or even places where people could evacuate to. And I'll end here with a few takeaways. We have some information in our paper on the optimal order of message contents and how that differs for 90 to 280 characters. And this is based on a lot of the research that a lot of that Jeannette has been involved in. And finally, I'd like to end our work today, end our webinar today, just talking about some of our additional research. And so Jeannette is currently involved in research on how to communicate risk visually. So where does the eye go on the message? Maybe how long it remains in certain locations, using eye tracking research. Jeannette is also involved in research on how how to use social media for ongoing engagement. And so this involves communicating over the long term. And so most of her research and most of the research generally on Twitter has been during threat periods. And so as part of the Heroic Project, Jeannette is looking into how a weather forecast office has communicated longitudinally and how their engagement differs in non-threat versus threat conditions, and how these differences may affect the likelihood that messages will be passed on. Both of those, the first two bullets there, will be presented by Jeannette at upcoming AMS conference, as well as the second one will be published in Weather, Climate, and Society. And then lastly, there's a master's student that I've been working with at the University of Maryland. She's working on a tool to help message providers in wildfire events, wildland urban interface, to create 360 character WIA messages. And so this is an interface tool where message providers will be asked a series of questions, and that the tool will then spit out a 360 character message that is grounded in the social science research that we presented here today. There's also ongoing work that Jeannette is involved in related to testing messages with the U.S. Geological Survey for earthquake early warning, as well as developing a message lexicon for emergency managers in big cities for short message devices. So we urge you to take a look at our paper in Natural Hazards Review. Like Jeannette said, it has complete info on our methods, templates, and dependencies. And we very much appreciate all of your attention today. I'm so glad that you were able to be on the line, and we'd love to take your questions.
Okay, well, thank you both for a great presentation. Dr. Kuligowski, I'm just going to keep your screen up as background for the webinar, and we'll get Dr. Sutton back on the line to answer some questions. Okay, so, and we do already have some questions pouring in. So the first one is just what constitutes expert review of a message, and who are the experts?
Great. Jeannette, did you want me to take that, or did you want to take that?
I'm trying to remember who the experts were, and the names are slipping my mind right now.
I have them here. For the messages, we asked Dennis Milletti, Hamilton Bean, Michelle Wood, and Nathan Wood. And so Hamilton's at University in Colorado, Michelle over in California, and Nate Wood at the U.S. Geological Survey.
Right. Okay. So when we say expert review, in some cases it was contextual, like Nate Wood works on Tsunami, but in other cases it was those of our colleagues who have been conducting the ongoing research about how messages should be constructed. And again, I do want to agree with Erica very strongly that some of the wording in some messages may not be aligned with the things that you would include in a message if you were putting it out at the time that people were under threat.
Okay, great. So another question we have is a request for you to comment a little more on the value of messages with maps and the appropriate frequency of messages when forecasts have not changed much.
I can speak to the one about maps. We don't have a great deal of research on the effectiveness of maps and the relationship between people's ability to read them and then take action. The research that's currently taking place in the eye tracking lab, we're looking at what people are paying attention to with maps. In particular, it's maps related to the other graphics that tend to be included on the PowerPoint images that are attached to a tweet, and oftentimes those images are very crowded with a lot of information that may, in some cases, that may be conflicting. In other cases, there may be information that's missing. such as not including a legend to help people to understand what the different colors mean. And then in other cases, we've had a really interesting time here at the University of Kentucky trying to actually do some analysis of what is the intended communication of whatever is in those images versus what do people actually see in the images. And so we've had a meteorologist who is my graduate student who's trained in meteorology, coding visual images alongside of a non-expert graduate student who doesn't have any training in meteorology, and they have vastly different understandings of what they're seeing in those images, which is going to lead to some additional research questions around where's the gap between what's being shared versus what people are interpreting from those images.
Okay, thank you. And so another question we have, what was the title of the paper referenced at the beginning of the presentation on slide 3 or 4? If you need to go back to that later, that's okay. But
Oh, are you still sharing my screen?
yes.
Oh, let me put that back up then. I apologize. Oh my. So is that so this is slide 4, and that the title of the paper there is alerts and warnings on short messaging channels, guidance from an expert panel process.
Okay, great. And then if anyone needs to refer back to the presentation, we'll also have it posted on our YouTube channel. So if you need to check on anything. And then moving on to the next question, Mickey Olson from the Office of Weather and Air Quality noted that we know these types of hazards are characterized by uncertainty, such as uncertainty within a forecast or rapidly changing conditions. So does the literature address or take into account uncertainty and the communication of uncertainty?
This is Jeannette, and I'll go ahead and try and answer that to the best of my ability. Is in general, the research that we examined on these short messages does not include a great deal of information about uncertainty, primarily because messages that are being sent out over imminent threat, the work has been focused on the context where the threat is actually approaching, and so there's a lesser need to talk about uncertainty because there's a great deal of certainty as the message is being sent out.
Okay, and I think that's a good response, Jeannette, because I think the second half of that question you were answering about maps talked about when the forecast, what do we put out when the forecast doesn't change much, and that was my thought on that question too. Is that these are going out when there's very little time to act, and potentially when when danger is imminent and the forecast it is what it is, and maybe there's not a whole lot of time to do a lot of updates and changing just because of the nature of the onset being so rapid.
Thank you. And Dr. Kuligowski, we actually just got a request if you could show the email addresses on the last slide again.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Sorry about that.
Thank you. And just moving on to the next question, we still have a few here. Can you contrast this work with some of Dr. Covello's work? He suggests no more than 3 points for risk communication.
I'm happy to pick that up and address it. So there have been some scholars who have advocated for different formulas of different kinds of how much information should be included in different messages. I've heard 3 points, or 3 points and 7 words or less, or different formulas for how you put these things together. And the research record that we are referring to does not reflect those recommendations that have come from Dr. Kuligowski. That's not to say that he would be incorrect. It's just that the work that we've looked at does not have a particular recommendation on the number of things that are included in a message beyond the following. When people do not have enough information, they become more desperate for information. And this is how rumors get started, is that we look for additional information in order to answer our questions. So the more information that can be provided to reduce the amount of time that people spend trying to search for information or to understand something that may not be clear, it not only does it lead to longer periods of time before people take action to protect themselves, but it also begins the process of people making up their own answers about what the protective action should be, which is where you start to see people sharing information that may not be valid, and sometimes can lead to some rumoring activity, which is not a malicious activity, especially when you're looking at that online. It tends to be people just trying to answer questions that are not answered because the risk communication has not been thorough and complete.
Great. Moving on to the next question. Where can we get more information on the WEA Wildland Urban Interface messages?
Great. So she will be defending her, it's a master's thesis. She'll be defending that in June. And so if you want to please send me a note, I'm happy to share her master's thesis with you. However, our plan is to take that work and publish it in various in the relevant journals, and also with conferences as well. So we definitely want to get that information out there. This is just kind of a beta version of her tool, but like I said, it is based on all of this research, and we're very excited about it. So please send me a note, and I'm happy to share with you what I have.
Thanks, and we actually have two more questions in the vein of WEA. So someone asked, are you aware and have you seen the final approved expanded WEA messages developed by the National Weather Service?
I have not. Jeannette,
I have not either. I know that there was some conversations about that or requests for information, but I have not seen them yet. Are they published somewhere?
Yeah, is that something we could take a look at?
Yeah, maybe the person who asked that question will be able to get in touch with you.
Yeah.
Great. And then also on that topic, what do you advise about the potential for delay of taking protective actions when following a URL in a WEA? For example, standing on a beach under tsunami warning while staring at a phone and trying to interpret a very small image such as an energy map.
Yes. Jeannette and I, and at our super users workshop, talked quite a bit about URLs and their place in short message alerts, and the ways in which the research, I don't think it falls on one side or another on the how effective URLs are. Jeannette, did you want to say any more?
I agree. So on one hand, it has the potential to lead people to accurate and credible information quickly if the systems are not overwhelmed by people trying to go to those single websites. On the other hand, it could delay them from taking action because they're waiting for it to go out to that website, and then they have to read the additional information when what you really want them to do is to get off the beach immediately. What's been interesting is doing the work on Twitter is that messages that include a URL do not get passed along as frequently as those without them, especially under that imminent threat context, which suggests within the Twitter context that people are making decisions about what kinds of tweets are more valued than others, and those that include a URL that are incomplete just don't get passed along. And we don't exactly know why. We have some theories on it, but under imminent threat, the research we've done on tsunami messaging on short messaging devices is that if you are trying to get more information instead of including a URL, it may be a better idea to thread a message where you're putting one message after another, or attaching a more complete set of instructions to the tweet itself, such as in place of that map giving more information, instead of asking people to go out to a URL.
And you certainly don't want people who are under imminent threat to be, I mean, we wouldn't necessarily expect that they're then sending the message on to other people. They may be doing that as part of the milling process, but it's not necessarily something that we want them to be taking time to do. And in relation to the website going down, thanks for bringing that up, Jeannette. That's something we also talked about at our super users workshop, and that had happened to people in our workshop participants, that they sent people to a particular website and that it crashed, just didn't have the capacity to take all of the, you know, the I can't put words together today, to take all of the online traffic all at one time. So thank you for bringing up those points.
All right, and it looks like the last question we have for now was someone noted that James Spann recently had a commentary that some people are geographically illiterate. So how effective are maps when the target audience are anecdotally unaware of their immediate area, and would that be a topic for a future study?
That's an excellent question, and it would be an excellent topic for a future study.
I completely agree. We were looking into maps. As Jeannette said, there wasn't a whole lot of research on maps related to short messaging. We did not go into the geography literature to learn everything we can learn about maps themselves. So I just want to make that clear, that that would be really interesting to see what is available in that literature, bring that into social media, but then short messaging, excuse me, but then doing experiments and other work on maps related to short messaging alerts. I think that would be a fantastic research project.
All right, great. Well, we're nearing the end of the hour, so that will conclude today's brown bag. And we'll have the recording posted soon. So thank you, Jeannette and Erica.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so much.